According to Genesis 1, on the third day of creation, God created the dry land, and he separated it from the water, calling the land earth and the water seas. Then God called forth vegetation from the earth and plants yielding seed. And as his fifth sign in the Gospel of John, when the disciples were out on the lake at night in rough waters, they are frightened when they see Jesus approaching the boat, walking on the water. But he says to them, "It is I, don't be afraid." And when the disciples wanted to take him into the boat, they immediately reached the shore. Valentin Tomberg writes of these events that the third day of creation is the day of procreation, of the mystery of seed and of growth, while the fifth miracle of St. John's Gospel is the sign of individual generative power as it came into being on the third day of creation. We'll start by looking at the third day of creation. The account of the third day of creation consists of two parts, both of which begin with the words, "And God said." The first part speaks of the process of concentration, condensation, causing the dry land to appear out of the sea. The second part tells of the arising of seed, each after its kind. The seed is the qualitative concentration of the entire kind, just as the dry land is the quantitative concentration of the sea. The second part of the narrative concerning the third day of creation is the more inward repetition, recapitulation of the first part. The coming into being of the earth out of the sea is recapitulated as the genesis of the seed out of the earth. The biblical words seed, trees, the sea, and the dry land, and also heaven and earth mean much more than the concrete things designated by these words. Again, as with the other days of creation, Moses is not writing here exclusively of the physical world described by these words, but also, or maybe even primarily, he is writing of principles that were formed both at the beginning of the world and at the beginning of our lives, principles around which consciousness develops, and he was using the language available to him, the language of the external world, which is reflected by the internal world. Different seed-like structures occur here. The land is described as a concentration of the sea, like a crystallization or concentrated form of it. Then the plants give forth seeds, which are concentrated forms of the plant, containing future plants condensed within them. And as with every other day of creation, the original seed is the Word of God, or the Logos, which exists before any physical manifestation. So rather than the seed bringing forth plants, the plants bring forth seeds, just as the water brings forth land. The seas that in Genesis' account of the third day of creation are described as the gathering together of the waters under the heavens unto one place, signify the state of concentration, gathering of force substance, whereby it retains its mobility in the sense of being able to be moved. On the other hand, the dry land means a state of still greater concentration, gathering unto one place, where the force substance is so condensed, contracted, that a coagulation into solidity is reached. The miracle of the third day of creation does not consist in existent substances and existent forces being so combined that out of them seeds were formed, but rather in the fact that by means of the power of the Word, and God said, active centers were established that caused the qualitative selection of substances and forces into which they were embedded. The miracle of the third day of creation is the genesis of monads, in the sense of Leibniz monad teaching. There came into being entities, monads, that are sovereign over the world of energies, the sea, and also sovereign over condensed substance, the earth, because they bear their own solidity in themselves and can condense themselves, as well as bearing within them their own mobility, their own energy or sea. They are independent of both the sea and earth principles because they bear in themselves these principles. They are in the world of sea and of earth, but not of the world. And here Tomberg says that we find ourselves at the fifth sign of Christ, the miracle of walking on water. He writes that the words of Christ to the disciples, "It is I, be not afraid," can also be understood as, "I am the seed of the kingdom of heaven." He also finds in this sign a symbol of what he calls the independence of the Son of Man with regard to the sea and the land. Just as the dry ground appeared on the third day of creation and provided footing where there was none, Christ was able to find footing in the middle of the stormy waters, and by doing so, immediately brought the disciples from the uncertainty of the waves to the security of the opposite shore. For this miracle, as an event and as a sign, is the revelation of the independence of the Son of Man with regard to the sea and the land. Jesus Christ, walking on the sea, needs no support, for he supports himself, and he does not climb onto the disciples' ship in order to be carried by it. Rather, it is he who brings the ship to the other shore. For he is not the one borne, but the bearer, not the one moved, but the mover. This is not only shown as a sign, but is clearly expressed by the words of the seed force spoken by Jesus in doing the miracle. It is I, be not afraid. These words can be understood as, I am the seed of the kingdom of heaven.